The audio engineer heard it first, a voice that shouldn't exist. It was 3 a.m. in a Burbank restoration studio in 2003 when Marcus Webb was digitizing old MGM sound reels marked for destruction. Most were worthless, ambient noise, failed takes, technical tests from the 1930s. Then reel number 447 played something that made him stop breathing. Jean Harlow's voice, unmistakable even through the static, speaking words that weren't from any script. "I need you to understand something. I'm not crazy. I know exactly what they're doing to me, and I know exactly why. They need me to forget who I was before this. But I won't. I'm recording this because someone needs to know. The woman you see on screen isn't the woman in this room. She's what's left after they take everything else." The timestamp on the reel was April 12, 1936, 14 months before her death. Marcus played it 3 times, then reached for his phone. Before he could dial, 2 men in suits entered the studio. They had credentials from Turner Entertainment, MGM's successor. They took the reel. Marcus never saw it again, but he'd already made a copy. Jean Harlow didn't start as Jean Harlow. She started as Harleyan Carpenter, a girl from Kansas City who married too young to a man she barely knew, trying to escape a mother whose love felt like suffocation. Los Angeles in 1928 was a factory town that produced dreams instead of cars. Harleyan arrived with her husband Chuck, who took a job in business while she bored Restless Beautiful in a way that made strangers stare, started taking bit parts in films. She had no training, no connections, just that face and that body, and a willingness to be looked at. Central casting sent her to Fox Studios for a party scene. The director barely noticed her, but someone else did. An agent named Arthur Landau watched Harleyan move through the frame, unconscious grace mixed with something wounded, and saw not who she was, but what she could become. The transformation was methodical. First, the name had to go. Harleyan Carpenter sounded like someone's aunt. They needed something that suggested both elegance and availability. Arthur chose Jean Harlow, using her mother's maiden name. The girl from Kansas City was officially dead. Then came the hair. The famous platinum blonde wasn't Jean's idea. It was a cinematographer's solution to a lighting problem. Her natural ash blonde hair photographed gray on film, so they bleached it, over and over, until it caught light like spun metal. The chemical burns on her scalp never fully healed. But here's the detail that gets lost in the glamour mythology. Harleyan resisted. She didn't want to bleach her hair. She didn't want to change her name. She wanted to be an actress, not a commodity. Arthur Landau explained the economics to her in terms she couldn't argue with. You can be Harleyan Carpenter and wait tables, or you can be Jean Harlow and never worry about money again. Choose. She chose survival. We call it stardom. By 1930, Jean Harlow had made nearly 24 films and earned exactly nothing approaching respect. She was the blonde or the girl, or in one particularly cruel review, a body with a face attached. Then Howard Hughes cast her in Hell's Angels. Hughes was already legendary aviator, inventor, millionaire obsessive who made movies the way other men collected stamps. He'd spent $4 million on Hell's Angels, a fortune in Depression-era money, and he needed a female lead who could hold the screen opposite the aerial combat sequences he'd filmed with genuine military aircraft. Jean wasn't his first choice. She wasn't his 5th choice. But the actress he'd originally hired had a heavy Norwegian accent that made dialogue scenes incomprehensible. Hughes fired her and needed a replacement immediately. Jean Harlow was available, cheap and photogenic. Perfect. What happened next is documented history. Jean's performance in Hell's Angels made her a star. The famous line, "Would you be shocked if I put on something more comfortable?" became a cultural shorthand for female sexuality in the pre-code era. Overnight, Jean Harlow went from nameless blonde to the platinum goddess who defined an age. But here's what the documentaries rarely mention. Hughes became obsessed with her, not romantically. Hughes's relationship with romance was complicated at best, but possessively. He'd created her, in his mind, and that meant he owned the blueprint. According to Hughes's business manager, Noah Dietrich, the billionaire kept a file on Jane that detailed everything. Her measurements updated weekly, her menstrual cycle, her dietary habits, her sleep patterns. It wasn't love, it was data collection. Hughes wanted to replicate her, to create other Jean Harlows who could be controlled more completely. Jean found out about the file in 1931. A sympathetic secretary at Hughes's office warned her. Gene's response, according to the secretary, was chilling. "He thinks I'm a machine he invented. He doesn't understand that machines break, or that sometimes they break themselves just to stop running." Louis B. Mayer bought Gene's contract from Hughes for $60,000 in 19. The promise was a lie. MGM had no interest in Gene's acting ability. They bought her because their audience research showed that men would pay to see her regardless of the film's quality. She was a guaranteed return on investment, and everything else was irrelevant. The studio put her in 7 films in 1933 alone. The pace was brutal: 16-hour shooting days, 7 days a week, with publicity appearances and photo sessions filling any remaining hours. Gene's personal assistant kept a diary that tracked her employer's declining health. Persistent headaches, unexplained bruising, periods of dissociation where Gene seemed to forget where she was. But MGM had a solution for fatigue: amphetamines. The studio doctors prescribed them freely, calling them vitamin shots or energy treatments. Gene knew what they really were. She'd grown up with an alcoholic father and recognized addiction's architecture. But refusing the shots meant admitting she couldn't handle the workload, and admitting that meant termination. So she took the shots. And when the amphetamines made sleep impossible, the studio doctors prescribed barbiturates. And when the barbiturates made her groggy in the morning, they prescribed more amphetamines. It was a pharmaceutical spiral designed to keep the machine running until the machine burned out. John met William Powell on the set of Reckless in 1935. He was everything MGM wanted her to be: sophisticated, cultured, respected. 15 years older, recently divorced from Carol Lombard, he approached John with none of the leering entitlement she'd come to expect from men in Hollywood. They became friends first. Powell lent her books, philosophy, poetry, novels that treated readers like intelligent adults. He invited her to museums and galleries, places where her platinum hair and famous face drew stares, but her opinions were actually solicited. Gene fell in love, not with the performance of love she'd been taught to project on screen, but with the quiet, terrifying real thing. Powell's letters to Gene, discovered in her personal effects after her death, and now held in a private collection, reveal a relationship far deeper than Hollywood's official histories acknowledge. In one letter dated October 1935, Powell writes, "You asked me last night why I love you. I'll tell you, because you're the only person I've met in this city who hates what she's become." That self-awareness, that refusal to accept the comfortable lie, it's the most courageous thing I've ever witnessed. They got engaged in February 1936. The wedding was planned for summer 1937. Gene wrote to a friend, "Maybe I can finally stop being Gene Harlow and just be Gene. Maybe that's enough." It wasn't enough, because MGM had other plans. Here's where documented history blurs into rumor, and rumor darkens into something that might be truth. In early 1937, Gene's health collapsed. The official story blames kidney failure brought on by scarlet fever she'd suffered as a teenager. But several sources, former studio employees, medical professionals who reviewed her case years later, suggest a different cause. The vitamin shots Gene had been receiving for years weren't just amphetamines. According to an alternative theory that circulated among Hollywood insiders, MGM's doctors had been experimenting with hormone treatments designed to maintain Gene's youthful appearance and energy. These treatments, it's been suggested, contained compounds that were damaging her kidneys progressively and irreversibly. A nurse who worked at Good Samaritan Hospital later claimed she saw Gene's medical chart during her final admission. The kidney damage, she insisted, was consistent with long-term toxic exposure, not childhood illness. When the nurse tried to question the attending physician about the cause, she was removed from Gene's care and warned that discussing the case would result in immediate termination. Whether this alternative theory is true remains unprovable. What's certain is that by May 1937, Gene was dying, and she knew it. Her last letters to William Powell are heartbreaking in their clarity. In one dated May 20, she writes, "I think I understand now what they mean by the show must go on." They mean it literally. Even when the performer is dying, even when everyone knows she's dying, she has to keep performing until the final curtain. The audience paid for a show. It's not the audience's problem that the star is bleeding behind the costume. Let's return to that audio reel Marcus Webb discovered in 2003. After Turner Entertainment confiscated the original, Marcus went underground with his copy. He shared it with select film historians, all of whom agreed. The voice was definitely Jean Harlow's, and the recording appeared to be authentic. But what was it? The consensus theory is that Jean made the recording in her MGM dressing room using a portable recording device that was relatively new technology in 1936. She was documenting her own life, creating evidence that something was wrong, that she wasn't simply a fragile woman who couldn't handle Hollywood's demands, but a person being systematically destroyed by the machinery of fame. The full recording, Marcus claims to have nearly 17 minutes of audio, allegedly contains Jean discussing the pharmaceutical treatments she was receiving, her deteriorating relationship with her mother, her fears about the wedding being canceled, and most disturbingly, her growing certainty that MGM would rather see her die than see her leave. They've calculated it. Jean allegedly says on the tape, "A dead Jean Harlow is worth more than a retired one. Dead, I stay 26 forever. I never age, never gain weight, never make a bad film or a controversial statement. I become eternal. Retired, I'm just another woman who used to be beautiful." They've done the math. Marcus Webb has never released the full recording. He's given various reasons over the years: legal threats from Turner Entertainment, ethical concerns about exploiting a dead woman's private thoughts, fear that the recording is actually an elaborate hoax that would destroy his credibility. But in a 2019 interview, Marcus said something that suggested a different reason. "I listened to that recording maybe 100 times, and at the end, Jean says something that made me realize why it should stay hidden. She says, 'If you're hearing this, it means I failed. It means I couldn't save myself. Don't try to save me now. Just remember I was real once. That's enough.'" Jean died on June 7, 1937, at 11:37 a.m. She was 26 years old. Her last words, reported by the nurse at her bedside, were directed to her mother: "Don't let them use my face anymore. Please, I'm so tired of my face." The funeral was a spectacle. 20,000 people lined the streets. William Powell was a pallbearer, along with Clark Gable and other MGM royalty. Louis B. Mayer delivered a eulogy that praised Jean's professionalism and dedication to her craft. The Hollywood machine mourned its platinum goddess with all the sincerity of a well-rehearsed performance. Within 6 months, MGM released Saratoga, Jean's final film, which she hadn't lived to complete. They used a body double for the remaining scenes, shot from angles that hid the substitute's face. The audience didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. The show went on. Powell never married again. He lived another 47 years and gave hundreds of interviews, but he only mentioned Jean once, in 1975, when a journalist pressed him. His answer was brief: "I loved her. They killed her. Everyone who worked in that system knows that. We just don't say it out loud because we're all complicit. Every person who bought a ticket, every critic who praised her beauty, every studio that copied MGM's methods, we built the machine together. Jean was just the one who got caught in it." There's a concept in developmental psychology called the mirror test. You place a mark on an animal's forehead and show them their reflection. If they recognize themselves, if they touch the mark on their own body rather than on the mirror, they've demonstrated self-awareness. They understand the distinction between self and image. Jean Harlow spent 9 years looking at her own image and being told it was more valuable than herself. The platinum hair, the sultry voice, the bombshell figure, these were real, but they weren't her. They were the mark someone else had placed on her, and she'd spent her entire career watching audiences react to the mark instead of the person beneath it. That audio recording, if it's authentic, represents something revolutionary. John Harlow touching the mark. John Harlow recognizing that the woman in the mirror wasn't her. Not really. John Harlow trying to document the distance between image and identity before that distance killed her. She failed. The distance killed her anyway, but the attempt matters. We're left with fragments. An audio recording that may or may not exist in full. Medical records that suggest systematic poisoning, but prove nothing conclusively. Letters that reveal genuine love, but can't confirm conspiracy. A woman who died at 26 and left behind enough mystery to fuel decades of speculation. Here's what we know for certain. Jean Harlow was transformed from Harley & Carpenter into a commodity that generated millions of dollars for people who didn't know her name. That transformation required her to deny essential parts of herself, and when her body began failing from the strain of maintaining that denial, the machine that created her was more concerned with protecting its investment than preserving her life. The rest is interpretation. Was she murdered? Was she a victim of Hollywood's indifference? Was she complicit in her own destruction because she chose the money over authenticity? These questions don't have clean answers. But here's the question that haunts me. If you could hear that recording, the full 17 minutes of Jean Harlow speaking in her own voice about her own life, would you want to? Would you feel like you were honoring her memory by bearing witness? Or would you be doing exactly what she spent her career being forced to do, performing for an audience that wants something from you but doesn't want to know you? Jean Harlow looked in the mirror and saw the distance between image and self. We look at Jean Harlow and see mythology, tragedy, cautionary tale. But what if the most radical thing we could do is stop looking altogether? What if the greatest respect we could offer is to let Harley and Carpenter rest, unknown and unprofitable? The machine wants us to keep watching. Jean Harlow wanted to be real. 87 years later, which impulse wins?